BYU. Everybody nationally is debating Alabama, Miami. Most of the Big 12 discussion centers on Boise State and why they are 5 spots ahead of the rest of the conference. Rightfully so. But what's not getting enough run is how ridiculous the treatment is that BYU is receiving from the committee right now. I saw somebody really boil it down to, if you look at BYU and Miami right now, they both finished sluggishly and lost 2 of their last 3. That was one of the things that Ward Manuel, the College Football Playoff Selection Committee chair, said was a demerit, more or less, against Miami's resume. Well, BYU has the same thing. They have the same overall record, but BYU has a higher strength of schedule and a much better win because they have a win at the number 8 team in the country in SMU. Criminal that BYU is getting no run there. They're sitting at 18. Miami's at 12. They're 6 spots behind them. Why is one of the great questions of this whole deal, man. We have no idea, other than just, I'm sure that's where the committee would come around and say something about the eye test. We're trying to find the best teams, not the most deserving, the eye test. Cam Ward does look a lot sexier than Jake Retzloff out there playing quarterback. I would have to imagine that is a big part of it. It should be based on merit. Guys, we got to be doing this based on merit, man. Everybody knows where that argument eventually goes to. If you start saying, hey, eye test, the logical conclusion of that is, well, let's start the year with the 24/7 talent composite and pick the teams that rank the highest there and just send them in. Send the top 12 from that and call it good. That is a dangerous game to play. Back to BYU's actual resume. I think the win that they have at SMU has to be the single most underrated, overlooked win of the college football season. Nobody cares. All these discussions about the Big 12 being a weak conference and everybody beating up on each other and nobody's actually any good there. There is no discussion about the fact that the committee thinks that SMU right now is the 8th best team in the country. And BYU won on their home field, handing them their only loss of the year. And it just doesn't matter. Like, nobody cares. BYU's 2 losses then are to a top 15 team in Arizona State on the road in what turned out to be a pretty close game. And then they lost at home to Kansas, who, yes, 5-7, but had beaten 3 straight ranked teams at one point in November, was at least a team with a pulse. And it was a close game. It was not Alabama getting pummeled 24-3 by Oklahoma. I just can't understand why BYU doesn't get more credit for the overall resume, but also for the SMU win. It's wild. Now, this is really where the blind resume test gets interesting. I gave you one earlier with Boise and Arizona State, which is a little more like, you look at that like, okay. But look at this. Look at these 3. All right. Team 1, 10-2 record. Strength of schedule, 44. Strength of record, 12. If you're looking at Team 2, same record, worse strength of schedule, worse strength of record. The best wins that Team 2 has are just all over teams that are receiving votes. I was looking at the AP poll for that. Teams receiving votes in the AP poll, whereas Team 1 has a couple of wins over teams receiving votes, one of them by 29 points, and a win over the number 8 team in the country, which was on the road. And then you look at their losses, virtually the exact same. You've got Team 2 losing to the 22nd ranked team in the country and one unranked team. Team 1 has lost to the 15th ranked team in the country and one unranked team. Of course, I'm sure most of you can figure out that Team 1, which would have objectively the better resume here, just objectively the better resume, Team 1 is BYU, Team 2 is Miami. Why is there a 6-spot difference between them? And there is all this debate, and the committee theoretically is painstakingly poring over whether or not we're going with Miami or Bama, who, of course, is Team 3 here, by the way, if you wanted to see their resume in comparison. how BYU is 6 spots behind. There is literally no other explanation but the eye test. If it is in any way about who is most deserving, BYU is getting colossally screwed right now by the committee. I get that it's all objective. They can make up the rules as they go and do. They take full advantage of the liberty that they have with that. But I'm just here to show you it's very much unfair if we're talking about what the overall resumes are. Now, I see somebody in there saying, hey, Team 3 is actually the best. That's fine. If you look at it this way, that is fine. I would say that one of the most damning things for Bama is that within the 2 unranked losses, one of those was by 21 points to an Oklahoma team that has just looked lifeless this year for basically the entire season. That was a really, really damning loss. But point taken, strength of schedule is a lot better than the other two, and they've got 3 pretty good wins there. I get it. My argument here is not, hey, BYU should be getting in over Alabama. That's not my argument. My argument is BYU should be right there with Miami in consideration for this last spot. If we're talking about teams that deserve consideration for the last spot, BYU should be in there. BYU should be right up in that pack instead of all the way back at 18. It's pretty asinine. It's pretty asinine. And, look, we know what the committee is doing. It's the Bama logo. It means a lot. The SEC, that patch, all the stuff we talked about earlier that the committee clearly is valuing here. I think it sucks that they're going to get in over Miami. I would prefer it be Miami to Alabama, but I would prefer there be a real discussion here about the 2 resumes between BYU and Miami. So anyway, it just feels like the other thing that's crazy, and I mentioned it, like Brett Yormark didn't even really seem to say a whole lot about that. That's not everyone's fighting the Boise thing because it's much more consequential. I get it. It would be great to have 2 teams in the playoff, but the more consequential thing immediately has been we need somebody to get a bye here. We can't take that perception hit of losing out on the 4th bye to Boise. But yeah, it's that BYU has such a compelling argument, and I've seen like a couple tweets about it, but they're not getting the run and the engagement. And so they sort of just fade. Like nobody seems to really be fighting that hard for BYU here. And even like BYU fans, even BYU fans, I've seen some just kind of resign to, I don't mean to speak for all of you, but just judging by the fans that I've interacted with, I've seen a good portion of fans that have kind of just like, well, we can't lose to Kansas. Like that was bad. Did it to ourselves. You can't lose that game. And there is some truth to that. But other teams are clearly not being held to the same standard. Other teams from similar conferences not being held to the same standard. And before you hit me with, well, John, you were just talking about, as you make this blind resume comparison, you were just talking about, well, it's dangerous to do it with Boise because it doesn't tell the whole story about how few Power 5 or Power 4 teams that they're actually playing and all that. Okay, well, a little bit of difference between the Mountain West, which was Sagarin's 8th best conference this year, and the Big 12, which was Sagarin's 2nd best conference this year. If we're talking about the difference between 2 and 4, which is the Big 12 and the ACC, well, again, the Big 12 is still in front, which speaks for itself there. But also, you have 2 conferences that at very worst are just viewed very similarly by unbiased computer metrics there. So different deal, okay, than when you're talking about the difference between G5 to even the Big 12. Even if you think the Big 12 is not a great conference, big gap there in terms of what the computers would tell you about playing in that conference versus here. Comparing the Big 12 and the ACC and rolling through those schedules, much different. Much, much, much different.